Good evening and welcome to this special edition of RFL as we honor the life and legacy of the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm Richard French. Well, tonight we're going to take a break from our normal format and we're going to push politics aside. We'll get back to that tomorrow. Instead, tonight we will focus on the state of Black America here in 2014 and try to see it through the prism of Dr. King's dream, including MLK's economic dream, as we examine the lingering gaps in an economy that continues to leave African Americans behind. We also look at the family factor, challenges on the home front that continue to strain African American families. And we will address education or the lack thereof, how to include more African Americans in an educational system and why so many today seem to be on the outside looking in. And we will also discuss the criminal justice system, with African Americans making up such a disproportionate part of the prison population. And of course, we'll talk about stop and frisk. Now, for all of these issues, we will not only be asking the whys, but also we'll discuss what needs to happen going forward. And finally, we'll of course hear from Dr. King himself, his dream. We will play an extended clip from the March on Washington. Now, it's a piece of American history all Americans should see, and not just those few lines we hear repeated so often.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Defense attorney and former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit in Westchester County's DA's office, Reniqua Allen. She's a freelance journalist and a fellow of Emerging Voices, easy for me to say. Reniqua writes about race, class, public policy, pop culture at Demos. And Dominic Carter here, as usual, political journalist and author. Ronald Ross. Ronald, the superintendent of the Greenbird Central School District in Westchester County, and one of the best voices I know on education. And we're also joined by the Reverend Owen Williams, the pastor at St. Mark Missionary Baptist Church in Jamaica, Queens, and author of The Corporate Christian. All right, guys, thank you all for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's get into economic issues. Now, I'm going to give some numbers for the table, and then you guys help me put a real meaning on what the data says. Average median incomes, if you want to do it by ethnicity, race here, Asian Americans, household, about $68,500. Whites, $57,000. All races, when you put them together, $51,000. African American households, $33,500 annually. Unemployment numbers. African Americans, compare that to the balance here, and it's double what whites are in this country. And when you look in certain age groups, men over the age of 20, for blacks, it's almost 12% here. Women over 20, about a percentage and a half less than that. And when you look at the ages between 16 and 19, again, the numbers, to me, shocking, double African American youth compared to all other here. And again, remember the unemployment rate in this nation for everyone is about 6.7%. Now this number, less about dollars and cents, but I think almost as important. It's called the optimism index. My family can improve its standard of living. When you ask this question here, you see the numbers. 46% of whites say yes. First time in modern American history, they're worried about doing better than their predecessors. But for African Americans, almost 3 out of 4 say they can do better than the previous generation. And our panel sounds off on this here. And I want to remind everybody at home, you be part of our conversation as well, if you will. Head over to our Facebook page and speak out on Twitter to join our conversation. Again, the state of Dr. King's dream. And Dominic, I'll start with you. When you see the numbers, they've been said before, but when you put them in context to where we are right now, in many ways, it seems for a lot of advancements, my gosh, you just look at the White House and who our commander-in-chief is, but in so many others, it seems like it's going backwards.
It does seem that way, Richard, and thank you, first of all, for doing this topic each and every year, focusing on the plight, the progress, the future of the African-American community. To answer your question on this particular issue, it starts with this man. and meaning a school superintendent. All the numbers that you just went down, to me, it starts with education. Because there is the issue of race, yes, and racism, but what are you going to do about it, and how are things going to get better? And the only way that I know, from the position of where I come, growing up in New York City public housing, in the projects, on welfare, no father, is through a man like this in education.
And Ron, we'll talk about education specifically in a later segment tonight, but you look pretty good for 20-something years old here, but you have seen generations come through. And what is different generationally now versus 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago? How has it changed here that's really manifested itself in this? Is it just that manufacturing jobs have disappeared, or is it something even more innate than that?
No, I think we lost out on, and I'd love to hear Dominique's reaction, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, when he wrote the thesis about the destruction of the black family structure, and I would like to hear from the Reverend there. Most black children are in a single family home run by the mother. Now, we can go into the reasons for that, but when you have that structure, when you have the larger urban areas that we have, and the things that go along with poverty, poor schools, poor health, poor police protection, tremendous turnover in the schools, the least experienced teachers, kids living in single-family home, lack of role models, and then you ask them to achieve in an educational system that, one, is not designed to help them. Blacks are more likely to be suspended from school. Instead of having a pipeline from public schools to Harvard and Howard, we have a pipeline from public schools to the prisons. And we don't talk about race. We think because Barack Obama was elected, we are in a post-racial society. In some ways, we're worse off now than we were on May 17th, 1954 with Brown versus the Board of Education. We're more segregated in Westchester County now than we were years ago.
You know, Reverend, put a human face on who comes in, not just on Sundays, but at other times. How, when we say the number, $33,000 for a household, what that has translated to and how this has changed, if at all, in your eyes in the last 10, 15 years, how it's become more difficult, because have and have-nots, the gap is as big as we can see here in recent memory.
Well, Richard, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. This is always a wonderful discussion to have. A short answer from a Black Baptist preacher is almost oxymoronic, so you may not want to invite me back. As I was saying earlier, the nation as a whole and the civil rights movement, Dominic hit on one front, education, but it has many fronts. And this battle of attrition, ebb and flow, back and forth, some successes, some failures, go forward, go back. The society at large, African American, white, Caucasian, we have seen a digression in our personal morality as a people, as a nation, as a society. What causes that? We're still looking for. There are many ideas out there what brings that about in reference to, and what that brings about is when there is no faithfulness, and I'm not necessarily saying faithfulness to God, faithfulness is your ethics on display, as I was mentioning to Nika earlier. You find that you can act out any kind of way you want in these senses and these emotions of hopelessness and everything that Ron was saying, when you feel frustrated and you can't carry on. And all these types of behaviors, one way or another, lead to the situation that you're in, dropping out, going to prison, giving up, notwithstanding. So yes, the answer is we feel that we can do better because they know they can do better if they would make better decisions from that aspect. In reference to the faces that come in, a study went out a couple years ago. In the civil rights movement time, 25% of Americans, all Americans, belong to some church. Today, 2% go to church. So in 2014, you wouldn't have a civil rights movement, which was a faith movement birthed out of the church. And that explains where you are today in that aspect.
You know, I'm curious, Reniqua, and we're going to get into the family unit because I think it's such a big part of it in the next segment here, but you write about this, and it's not just the imagination that things are tough across the country economically, and as I said before, the income inequalities are very real, and it's not just relegated obviously to the African American population or one another. However, it does seem that the black population's been hit especially hard. We've gone through all the metrics, whether it's unemployment, whether it's the vanishing of the manufacturing jobs overseas. Is it as simple as that, where there was a job that you could get if you didn't go to college before and you can't get one now, or is it something much more complicated than that, why this population especially has been hit hardest with the economic downturn?
Well, I think there are lots of things at play. As Dominic mentioned, I think education is certainly at the root of a lot of the problems. And there are some cultural deficiencies that we need to work out. The explosion of single-parent homes, not that, African Americans can't succeed. I came from a single-parent household. Not that you can't succeed that way, but there is such a huge number of single-parent households that we have to look at what's going on with the African American community. And, absolutely, I definitely agree that there is somewhat of a crisis of morality. However, for me, what a lot of this comes down to is jobs, right? Martin Luther King Jr., when he had his I Have a Dream speech, a lot of people forget that he was marching. That was a march for freedom, and, they were looking for jobs. And I think that and Martin Luther King really understood the link between economic justice and racial justice. And I think that those two things go hand in hand, right? African American unemployment, it's not just a symptom of the recession. It's not, African American unemployment rates have been double for the past 30 years of the rest of America, right? So we really have to look at some of the reasons why that's happening. Absolutely, a decline in manufacturing, I think, is a major, major part of it. We also see an explosion in this low-wage job sector now, right? So a lot of people that used to be able to go out and get a good union job, and I won't even start yet with the decline of the unions, right? Because that's
Thank you, because I'll never get to the other subjects here.
That's a huge problem, yeah. But we have to look at some of these factors, and I think you absolutely hit the head on the nail. Before people could, graduate from high school at, $19 an hour, they could feed their family, their wife could stay at home, they could put their children through school without accumulating massive amounts of debt, and we can't do that. So it's a problem in the African American community. There's, employment discrimination. African Americans just have a harder time getting jobs, period.
And I want to pick up with that, and I'm going to start with you when we come back from the break, because a lot of this has to do with education, but also family here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the state of the black family today. We talked about single-parent households, but it's more than that, and how much that impacts some of the conversations we're having right now. So please stay with us, and again, sound off at home here. Tell us what you have to say about the state of Dr. King's dream, and you get on over to our social media platforms to do that. We'll be right back.